Okay, Victoria, welcome back to the podcast. How are things?
Good, thank you. Yeah, it's lovely to be back on the podcast. Yes, I'm doing very well, thank you.
Good. And it's lovely to have that background.
It's a digital background. How cool is that?
I generally, when I logged in, I thought, is that real?
Yep, no, it's totally real. There's no little blurred edges. No, that's actually my view. So, yeah, I'm a very lucky lady.
Yes, absolutely. So, as always, when we speak on podcasts, there's no a sort of official topic for today. So we'll see where it goes. But I thought it'd be nice to get you on really as a sort of end of year episode. I imagine we can start to reflect on this year and some of the lessons maybe we've learned, or from a practitioner perspective, things that we've learned in regards to healing and stuff like this. So I don't know if there's like a intuitive place that you feel we want to start with this.
It's so difficult. It's such a year, hasn't it? It's been like, in health terms, it's been an enormous year, really. Like the world has become uh, sort of fluent in language that they never knew they were going to need to use this time last year, and it's changed so much. So maybe we should start with the obvious health crisis and sort of do a where are we at with that right now, maybe.
Sure. Where are we at with that?
It's funny. I think there's two themes, and you feel free to agree or disagree, but I think there's two themes that I've got now. One is the kind of vaccine discussion, which is huge, and I don't know whether we want to go there, but that's obviously coming up a lot now that there are vaccines being offered, being given, and many more in kind of production. And the second theme is the long COVID, so the kind of chronic fatigue post-viral long COVID thing that I'm starting to see in practice, and I'm imagining that you are too. And that kind of seems to be those two things, plus the obvious kind of like it's Christmas, London's just gone into tier 3 lockdown. It feels like it's not going anywhere very quickly.
Yeah, and I guess to add to that, then there's sort of the isolation, solitude component of everything this year that's just affected so many. So that just kind of almost rubs the salt in the wound.
Yeah, well, and it takes away the infrastructure of support. It takes away the where we would normally go for nourishment or for healing. We can't do any of that. You can't even do a yoga class with a load of other humans and have the auras of people around you at the moment. So it's like the solution to the pandemic, as has been said since the beginning of the year, the solution is almost worse than the actual illness itself at times. And I think it's that interesting paradox of like people are finding out what is important and kind of starting to think, oh, we really value all the things that we've now got. But that was cool first lockdown, like having that impression of, oh, we really value these things that we were missing was fine first time around. Now that we're still being told we can't do them again, and for me as a musician, the arts has just been cannibalized by this. My friends were supposed to have a concert this very evening in London, and they've had to shut it to live audiences, and it just is starting to really affect our humanness in very many ways, is how I feel about it.
Yeah, I think as you say, that this sort of second lockdown has been such a different experience compared to the first for so many reasons, including just the obvious ones around the length of our days in the UK, for example, and elsewhere. But yeah, it's been interesting, I think, also to reflect on how the collective has influenced us individually as well. And that might sound a little bit odd, but I think for me, it was probably the first time where I really felt like the overall energy of the country and the world was, you could feel it.
Yeah,
and that was really powerful. And I wonder how many other people kind of, for the first time, became truly aware that there is that sort of interconnection there.
Oh, completely. And I live around sort of spiritual people in my life, so they were feeling it very early on, in terms of the weight of stress. I think is the easiest and simplest way to put it. The weight of stress and fear, But then it started spreading to people who you wouldn't even think would think like that. And whether they related it to actually being tuned into a collective consciousness field where the vibration of it all has become really quite agitated and fractured. So there are sides, there are factions, there's the pro-mask, anti-mask, there's the pro-vax, there's all of these kind of divisions that start, and people are feeling it. And whether they were attributing it to that or just the relentless news stream of, stuff that they were listening to, I had conversations with people that I wouldn't expect to be tuned into that, saying that they were feeling the kind of weight of it from a kind of global perspective even.
No, absolutely. So I guess a kind of a question for me that comes out of that is, rather than focusing on that element of things, which is just a bit depressing for all of us,
yeah.
are there things within your own life or working with your clients that you found to be helpful, just in regards to supporting ourselves during these times and during this experience of being kind of isolated and disconnected?
I love talking to you because my brain always goes to the weirdest possible solution first. And for me, the biggest thing that I've been trying to help certainly my patients of late with is the concept of enemies. It's a strange one, go with me. But there is this the real, as I was saying before about these divisions, there's us and them, there's us and the virus, there's us and there's people who are more locked down than others, there's all of these kinds of it's been a year where we've seen difference, where we've been pushed to see the difference in, we're even now thinking about shielded populations versus elderly versus, like, we're thinking in ways that we never really did before, and we're trying to stratify because that's what we're being told to think like. And I think, and then of course the bad actors, the people who we take against in terms of we think they're behaving inappropriately from whichever side of the fence you're on. My huge effort certainly in the last few months has been not to try and paint enemies anywhere. So not to think that, people who are doing certain things are evil and all those kinds of things, and really trying to respect the emotional state of every human being that we've got and actually take it up a level. So I've really been encouraging my patients and friends and family to get really metacognitive on it and really start to think about all of this from we're all just fragments of consciousness in form. So that's what we are, which means that all of the negative, all of the dark, all of the shadow frequency that we've literally been thrust into this year is part of consciousness in form, just as much as all the light and the positivity. And it's not necessarily about working out what it means right now, this year, today. We're probably not going to know that maybe for a decade, who knows? But it is very much this kind of ability to surrender into the shadows, into the darkness, by accepting that it's as relevant a part of human experience as the happy times, as the light, and it's ancient, knowledge, the shadows are part of the light. You can't have the light without the shadows. And it's difficult to do it when you're doing it in personal stuff and seeing your own wounding. But if we just see this as kind of global wounding and the shadow patterns of humanity and the frequencies being pulled out and shown to the light almost, it's almost the only way that I can see to accept. I think is, because we're all searching for acceptance of these lockdowns, and it, as you say, it's very easy to focus on the negative side of it, but what we then seek is how to accept what we're going through, how to find a way to be okay within it. And the only way that not the only way, but the truest way I've found is to respect that it's part of a process and it's part of the dark and the light sides of humanity almost. Does that make any sense? Super metacognitive, I apologize.
It does make sense. It reminds me of, am I going to be able to find it quickly? The dark side of the light chasers. That kind of, that sort of idea around ultimately accepting the shadow is one of the themes within the book ultimately. And how another element that I read from Charlie Morley, he's got a book, he's a lucid dream sort of teacher, and he's amazing. His books reading his first book gave me my first ever true lucid dream, which was, to be fair, probably like my top 5 life experiences. But he talks about the golden shadow, that was the first time I was aware that, going sort of into your point here, that from a shadow perspective, you've got the dark, but there's also the golden shadow. And he described the golden shadow as all the bits that we have kind of suppressed and repressed, but it is the light. It's kind of the power that we're scared to maybe lean into, for whatever reason that may be. And I actually reflect on that and think that I'm probably more scared of my golden shadow than I am of the dark shadow. And that was a really interesting kind of lesson to reflect on.
Yeah. And I think the positives of all of this is people have become more reflective, generally speaking, about everything. It's like, what are we here for? Like, I've asked myself that question from a very young age because of what we've shared before in discussions about what happened to me. I've had to look at, what am I here for? What's the point of life? And I actually think that the benefit of going through crisis is that it does allow you to have those thought processes. And so many people don't have an opportunity of true crisis, but it kind of has brought us to that point this whole year. And whether your crisis has been emotionally, personally, losing loved ones, or the threat of that, it's made us see who we really are at times, if we've had the courage to look. And that's the fascinating thing. It's like, I've seen more charities crop up this year than anything else. Like, I've seen more people just doing good stuff, more random acts of kindness. And it has the crisis is always horrible, but crisis is always there for us, not against us, is how I see things. And finding that golden shadow, looking to the edge, to the light, to the powerful side inside of you. I've not read the references that you're talking about, but I imagine it's partly called the golden shadow because it takes the shadows, it takes the crisis, it takes the dark times for us to really call out from our own depths what we really and truly can be and our ultimate potential.
Yeah, I think so. That's powerful.
Sorry,
actually,
Karen.
no. I was gonna say, it reminds me of a psychedelic experience. Actually, it was at the very end of it, but there was a moment of, I guess, reflecting on how life is finite, but at the same time, only human life, obviously. So there's this other side to it, which is just eternity, which is equally scary in some ways. So you end up in a place where there is no kind of comfort when you think at that kind of level. We have the human experience and then whatever comes after this, ultimately. I guess going back to what you were saying there around, it's given people an opportunity to reflect. It's almost, again, that kind of maybe double-edged swords. I certainly have friends who have had the time to reflect, and working from home, for example, it's allowed them to shift their values and how they want to live as of now, moving forward into the future, in regards to even mundane things like, I want to work from home one day a week now and be with my kids, or whatever it may be. But yeah, it's definitely been a year to take a step back and reflect.
Absolutely. And it is one of those things where I don't know what we're going to think of 2020 when we get 5 years down the line, because ultimately it's been a year. Like, if we look back at a year of our lives a few years ago, like, years fly by when we look in retrospect, but this has been a very interesting recalibrating year. And for me personally, finding it just fascinating what I ended up doing this year, like just the randomness of like happening to make the best decision ever in not taking a London clinic space, a big expensive London clinic space, was nothing to do with COVID. It was nothing to do with the potential of a virus, because I didn't know about it at that point. But just for me, one of the keys in life is making decisions, and how we make decisions, where we listen to in terms of how do we make decisions. We don't often think about how we make decisions, but if you think about it, everything in life is based on decisions. So for me, I've always had a very strong belief in just let your body lead you where you're going. And if I hadn't have done that, I would have cognitively rationalized my way out of being in South Africa. I would not be here. I would not have rented this place, which has just nourished me so much because of the view, because of everything that I've had the opportunity to do here. I think I would have made the rational, I'm, how old am I? I'm 34 now. I need the clinic. I need the proper business. I need to do all the kind of like, let's make money. Let's have the nest egg in the bank because we've got to worry about a pension. If I'd have made those mental decisions, I'd have done lockdowns in the centre of London in a concrete flat, 1-bedroom flat that I wouldn't have been able to see any sky out of even. And you just think it's interesting, and I'm very lucky to have found a way very early on in my life to trust something deeper than my cognitive rationalization, and ended up in South Africa, in a beautiful country, to explore that I haven't been able to explore fully because we're locked down just like everybody else is. Not as much at the moment, but it's coming back. We're getting a second wave. So it has given me a lot of confidence in actually that early lesson that I had in how we make decisions, and actually maybe our minds aren't the things that are supposed to tell us everything about what we're supposed to be doing, and where is that other authority. And again, it harkens back to, we're all connected. This is a oneness. This is like, who are we? How are we living? Like, it can't all be as simple as what we see, perceive, think. And then you mentioned psychedelic experiences, and speaking of things that seem to have happened this year, that's really kind of taken an uptick this year. People exploring psychedelics, the formalization of it, the kind of, it's becoming much, what's the best way to say it, much more respected now, rather than just wacky people going off to do,
Right.
mushrooms, whatever. And you can speak to this much better than I can because you've been in this world. So do share what you feel about the way kind of the psychedelic world has gone this year.
Yeah, I kind of put breathwork within that almost same field, because that's been another one that's really come to the what's the word I'm looking for? Well, the fort, especially because of lockdown. So, in our first lockdown, there were so many breath workers who came and were doing their Instagram lives on a daily basis. And it was just, I think, a savior for so many people. So I put them on almost the same level in regards to how they've evolved and how the masses have become exposed, maybe, because I think even with psychedelics, because of the fact they got shut down in the 70s, speaking from personal experience, I was just completely oblivious to them until last year. Ultimately, I knew they existed, obviously, but I knew nothing about them, nothing about the history, nothing about what they can do for us from a physical, emotional, spiritual, mental sort of perspective. And I think it's just really exciting that there is that movement happening. And obviously the research is probably the reason behind that ultimately, because it's giving, I guess it's giving kind of modern society it's validating them. People kind of like science these days. There are lots of us that like the data and want it on paper that, okay, this is what the science is saying, and therefore I'm more open to exploring it. And that's, I guess, that could be a conversation in its own right. The fact that I think at a society level, we've lost that intuitive ancient wisdom that we once had. And speaking to our great-great-great-grandparents, they would just think it's bizarre that we view, or many of us view, psychedelics the way we do. So conversations that I was having last year when I was telling family or friends that I was going to some retreat in the Netherlands, it really fascinated me, the terminology and the reactions that you get from your community when they're not in that space whatsoever. So, this idea that I'm just going and taking drugs was a really common kind of idea, obviously. Yes, they are class A drugs in the UK, but you just have to look a little bit into the history of it to understand that shouldn't be the way it is ultimately. And yes, we need some form of regulation because of how powerful they can be, but they shouldn't be seen as some sort of drug. So for me, and again, like, Victoria, like many of our listeners, I'm sure will, people who take a high dose psychedelic often will put it in the top 5, top 10 events of their entire life. It's up there with our wedding days, etc. And there's a reason for that. I think almost this year with COVID, there's been that kind of, going back to what we spoke about earlier with this idea of feeling the collective. I mean, that's a fundamental experience within psychedelic and breathwork, really. So people are experiencing it more on a normal consciousness level ultimately, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, and it's such a testament to the well, testament's the wrong word, but it's language. Like, we think it's a drug because some authority at some point classified it as a drug, and it the whole everything this whole when these spiritual practices come to the fore, actually we're returning to ancient civilizations where plant medicines were not only a part of the society, but fundamental just to like getting through the day. Like, if you go to an indigenous society, it's not like they're taking ayahuasca all the time, obviously, but they are using they're using nature to support the human vehicle. And as soon as we get to sort of westernized society, it becomes, we're so divorced from nature, and we see that we need medication, drugs, compounds that are artificially made to resolve every issue. And a lot of what we do in our practices is return to the herbal side of things, where garlic can do as much as an antibiotic, if you like. But there is also, and that's sort of okay. People get supplements. They get that maybe a whole food supplement might be okay to take. It's like people have this cognitive acceptance at that point. But then there's this cognitive dissonance when it gets to a mushroom or a plant that is seen as, illicit, hedonistic, naughty, whatever people think it is. And I think that people have a very strange relationship with altered states of consciousness. As if it's something to fear, or it's the ultimate death of the ego, though, right? Because we're like, my consciousness, my brain, it's a bit like I was saying about making mental decisions. We don't trust another authority, whether it's our body or the voices that speak to us, because like, we have to be sovereign. We have to know we're the human beings, but actually just dropping into it and letting whatever it is, breathwork, the psychedelic experiences, holotropic breathwork can do loads in terms of like releasing chemicals that a drug would a drug, see, I've done it as well, you just fall into language, but a plant medicine would do. And nobody, you can have bad trips, of course, but nobody comes back from a consciousness expanding experience and feels like they are less than. They always feel more than. They feel more connected, more a part of a bigger oneness, rather than, oh, I've just seen that the world is all interconnected and I now feel terrible in my life. That's not a typical story, if I've ever heard that. I have never heard that.
Yeah, no, it's really true. And I love what you were talking about in regards to not just using kind of our cognition, I guess, to make decisions, because that really resonates with me when I've said it in a blog, and I think I've said it before on my old podcast around, I think there are still 5 experiences in my life where there was just a genuine felt sense that it was the right decision. It wasn't a mental construct. It was a general feeling in my body that I could access that was like, this is the right thing to do. This is the right time to do it. And, we all have that. We'll call it conviction ultimately within the decision, but that conviction comes from a feeling, not a cognitive narrative.
Yeah, and if you study psychology at all, you very quickly realize that everything mental is a cognitive narrative. It is a construct, usually based on the nervous system's predisposition to self-protection. So we will create a fiction around everything that is very benevolent to oneself and self-preserving. You have to think in ways that protect your reality, basically. But that's a very narrow way to exist, because you can't ever know absolutely everything. So how can you ever make a decision with your mind, almost just with your mind? And I have worked for a long time with a system called human design, which is a bit weird. It's a bit astrology. It takes a lot to explain it to people, so I'm not going to take up the entire podcast doing it. But there is a part of it is showing you how you were born to be, basically. But it's not predisposition. It's actually the very simple art of human design is empowering people to know the best place for them to make decisions based on the things they have consistent energy within and the things where they're able to be influenced by the world around them. That's the simple tenet of human design. And there are types and profiles and all of these like finer nuances of evaluation, but not a single human being is born to make decisions solely with their mind, because we have so much else within us as energy systems, as, you know, things that are influencing us. So, and I work so much with people who have nervous system patterning, whether it's from childhood trauma or, you know, terrible experiences that have happened, which change everything within their nervous system, that expecting us to think cleanly and clearly and to be able to cognitively rationalize our way through everything in life is just, it's a misnomer. We can't do it. And as you so rightly said, we'll we'll blame something kind of, I don't know, conviction, or, you know, just this inner knowing. It's like, well, inner knowing is not mental knowing ever. It's a felt sense of connection to something external that is pulling you, probably physically more, way more than mentally, in that direction that you're making the decision. And it can be simple things of like you know, simple things in terms of what you're going to eat for dinner tonight, versus more complicated things in terms of like whether you're going to randomly come to South Africa.
Yeah, I think that idea of felt sense is such a big one. And I think, as you say, it's being kind of sucked out of us a little bit. I feel like, you know, we don't, certainly I haven't, I'll use myself as an example. It's something that I got really good at, I think, which is staying in my head and trying to kind of cognitively rationalize myself through everything. And you end up just in this massive limbo land where you don't really make any decisions, including what to have for dinner.
Because our brains are brilliant. And if you're thinking in one direction, you can automatically turn it around and think in the other direction. We can talk ourselves around in circles. We do talk ourselves around in circles.
And I think, do you have any strategies or thoughts then in regards to how to, if someone is kind of, they've patterned themselves to be in their head a lot, are there some basic things that we can do to sort of, I guess, drop down a bit into the heart and into the body?
So for me, it's not just about the heart. I'm very much a kind of center of the belly. You know, our bellies are so rich in terms of nerves, in terms of everything. And it's a big reason why, you know, gut health's a huge thing. It's the nerves that are around the gut that have a huge impact and influence. And dropping into the belly really low down and feeling connected to senses, like really low, like honestly, just sit and put your hand on your belly. We're so Pilates, navel to spine, tense all around this, and this is why we can't breathe. Like, this is why we don't breathe properly. It's like we've, as a society, developed a really negative relationship with abdominal areas, like whether you're supposed to have a six-pack or, you know, you're just not thin enough for like whatever Instagram society reality. The only time we celebrate like weight is when women are pregnant. Like, it's the only time we say, oh my god, you're glowing because you're like, look at all the you know, voluptuousness of you. And it's just like, it's just insane. So we have this weird relationship against our bellies. So literally, there's ancient Chinese arts. I'm gonna say, I think it's called Qi Tsang or something like that. Don't quote me on that. Like, find it, but it's belly massage. It's literally lie on the floor flat and just massage your back. Really feel what's there. Like, and this is often what I tell my clients with gut issues. It's like, if we've got a motility issue, quite a lot of the time it's because we're so tense within our beings that we're gripping all of our organs down here. So just literally like pushing things around, it just manipulates our bodies into feeling connected elsewhere. And because we are physiologically touching ourselves, the brain has to send a nerve impulse down there because you have to be aware of it. So it's like, it's this creating this loop, the feedback loop between brain and belly, where you can actually drop into this real, you know, if you think of your center of gravity, it is nowhere near your head. Literally nowhere near your head. So being pulled by this kind of central area along these fractal lines of direction and life, and you know, when we feel like we want to go somewhere, when we're not like pulled by our heads, we feel it with our being, and it has to be lower, it has to be, you know, abdominally, and it's this kind of we think that we need external therapy a lot. We think that we need somebody to do something to us. Our hands are so capable, they're so sensitive. We are capable of using our own touch to completely change our nervous system in a moment. Like, it's so possible. And all too often we freeze within either mental cognitive stuff or within just like panic, or like there's stuff happening. So just using hands, touch your heart, touch your belly. You know, there's ancient, I don't know, energy toning movements where you literally rub over all of the meridian points to try and get your body back into a sense of balance. There's energy switching, and even in like basic kinesiology, like if you're out of balance, is what they would call it, you literally just tap round in a anti-clockwise direction around this area here on your collarbone, and it just brings your body back into balance because it's a reset button for the system. So there's all these things that we forget. And I mean, I learned that when I was 16. My mum will listen to this podcast and she'll go, oh my God, Victoria, I can't believe you're talking about like energy toning movements and the random stuff I used to tell you when you were a child but you never did. I was like, yeah. And if you're worried about like electromagnetic frequencies and all these distracting things, it's not necessarily that we have to create Faraday cages around our own beings. We need to reconnect to our own nervous systems, and literally tapping around hard, you have to do it quite hard, and getting yourself back in balance and touching your belly. Recentering you is the universal solution to quietening the noise from the outside world, whether that's media, electromagnetic frequencies, viruses, you name it.
Interesting. It reminds me of in transformational breath, they do what they call body mapping, and it's not strictly like meridian lines, but it's the same principle. So you've got areas of the body which are related more to anger, from memory, and again, don't quote me on this, but the right side is more the masculine, the left side more feminine. So there's the giving and the receiving, and therefore the right hand side in I think kind of the upper trapezius is kind of the anger area, and it's more around, let's see if I can remember this, sort of if you are angry currently, it's more medial, so it's kind of more midline. Previous anger is more lateral or away to the shoulder. And then, for example, I was really tender underneath the rib cage diaphragm area, and this is around, from memory, kind of love ultimately, and how well are we receiving love on the left hand side, and how well are we giving love on the right hand side. And you know, you're going through the transformational breath with your facilitator palpating those areas, and you almost breathing into that pressure, and it was beautiful.
Sounds it. I mean, sounds amazing, because we store everything in our bodies. Like, I mean, I could name 10 books that talk about that in every dimension. And like, I don't talk about this enough in my public stuff that I put on Instagram or blogs or anything like that, but I do think that every symptom that crops up has a multi-layered reality to it. I don't think it's either or. I don't think it's just a spiritual thing, just an emotional thing, I think it's, you know, there has to be a mechanism. There has to be a how that it goes wrong. So there will be an injury, you fell over, it's just the fact that you slept awkwardly. Definitely, totally true. But there's also an and. There's the, yes, I slept awkwardly, and like, if you slept awkwardly, why did that specific place go? It's all of those kinds of things. And that and, for me, is that deeper emotional complexity to where we just resisting energy flowing through us at any level has to create a tension pattern, which will create a symptom, which is our opportunity to heal it. And breathing into it's wonderful. Or, you know, imagining that changing from red to blue, or whatever the colors of your pain to peace are, hugely impactful, because we do, and it is related to the kind of emotional stuff. And whether you're doing reflexology on the feet, which is looking at specific organs, or whether you're just, like you say, there are different parts of our body, like, you know, knees are all to do with pride and ego, and, you know, because and ankles are all to do with how flexible are we all of these kind of metaphysical meanings, that is always worth looking at, even if you read it and go, I don't have a clue what that means. Just like, and you can Google this stuff now, like spiritual meaning of left toe pain, and you get a load of results. And it's always interesting to look at, to work it out. And many people will know that I'm having a load of dental work, have been having a load of dental work for a long time, and it's like, it's all gone really wrong in the last couple of weeks. So I spent half my life in the dentist at the moment, and, you know, dentists are on, how are you getting your teeth into life? Are you getting your teeth into life? It's your power. It's my canines that are the problem, which is, it's that attacking tooth. It's like, where am I not being strong enough in my convictions? Where am I not speaking up? Where, like, if I just thought I've got dental problems, I'd have a really boring life. Like, I really love like digging into this to grow as a human with all of the things that are going wrong in my it's a hell of a overstatement, but you know what I mean. It's like all of the things that you feel within your body, opportunity. There's always an opportunity to go, like, where am I giving and receiving love okay at the moment? Like, oh, am I? And just having the pain stops us long enough to ask the question. And like, questions are brilliant. Just asking questions of ourselves, like, am I speaking up for myself at the moment? Am I speaking my truth at the moment? Am I okay at the moment? Like, I've asked the "Are you okay?" question more times this year, and as the years gone on, people have started to be honest, and it's so interesting because normally it's like, yeah, fine, yeah, and you're into the topic of conversation. But like, particularly December, people have gone, yeah, I'm all right, which means I'm not all right at all, but I'm coping. And
Right.
it's like, great, wonderful. Can we have a conversation about it, please? Please, people, talk about your pain, talk about your challenge, because it heals ultimately.
But it's having the relationship container, whatever, to do that, isn't it? And I think that's where it becomes challenging in the modern world, because certainly us Brits, I saw actually an Instagram post this morning from Jules Evans, Jules Evans, I think, who I love. He's like a philosopher, journalist dude who he's got a couple of books I've read. One is The Art of Losing Control, and it's all about ecstatic experiences. And basically, he does his research for this book, and each chapter is a different way to experience ecstatic experiences. So there's a chapter on sex, there's a chapter on meditation and going to silent retreats, there's a chapter on psychedelics, there's a chapter on music, on sport, on religion. It's a really great book. And then he's done one on spiritual emergencies, which I was going to mention earlier, actually, when you brought something up, because basically he and other people who have written chapters within that book, again, whether it's through meditation, yoga, just normal life challenges that they've gone through, or psychedelics, there's these people who go into what I think Stan Grof called or termed spiritual emergencies, which is what through conventional medicine today we would essentially call a psychotic break to a large degree. So this is going back to what you were talking about at the beginning of our conversation, almost, when you brought this up. And there are these, I guess, case studies, each chapter, of people who sometimes for several months, if not over a year, they had lost ego, they were hallucinating, they were seeing guardian angels, they were seeing all these things, but fortunately they all found a community that understood, believed, had experienced, and they created a safe container for that person to kind of come back to normality, so to speak. But the reason why I kind of brought that up initially was because just thinking about my own personal / family story, sometimes we don't have the people around us who have the, whatever you want to call it, I guess, skill set, ability to hold that space when someone they love is in pain. I mean, that's quite a hard thing to do for all of us ultimately. But there's only one way to get better at it, I guess.
Right, you have to, like, if you want to upskill yourself in that way, like, I think as human beings we're so scared of getting things wrong, particularly in those touchy circumstances like grief or pain, or like the one thing about people who are in pain is they will probably tell you if you misstep. Like if you're that raw emotionally that and somebody says something completely jarring, you kind of tell them, because like it's all so much at the surface. And you're so right in that we need safe places, but I also think we need to make more places safer. Like, we shouldn't need to have an ashram to process. We should be able to sit on a tube and not feel frightened about, like, if you cry. I'm pretty sure I've cried on a tube at times, like, because I just am so on the surface with my emotions. And I don't, the thing is, you don't always need people to hold you in it, but you do need those kinds of, I think we just need to permit a lot more. I think we need to give permission for people to be human beings a lot more than we do. And making more places safer is really that kind of essence of just, you don't have to say the right words. Back to touch, just put your hand, I mean, COVID willing, just put your hand on somebody and let them cry. They don't need your narrative. They don't need you to tell them anything. If you and your family story, it's like, even if you said it to me right now, as a professional who does this for a living, I would sit here and go, it'd be platitudes. It would be, oh goodness, oh really? And then it would be like, if something terrible's happened to people, the first thing we say is, I'm so sorry that happened to you. Tell me more. Tell me your version of the story, because hearing somebody's version of their truth is worth 10 years of therapy at times. You don't need to tell them what the truth should be or how they should feel about it, or, you know, whether they should recalibrate, reframe, whatever. Just hearing people's reality is a huge gift, and we are all capable of shutting up for a minute and listening.
Yeah, I keep on wanting to bring in a talking stick into our home because it makes that so much easier to do.
Good luck with that when you have a baby in the new year, and it's all be like, they don't listen to talking sticks, they just cry.
But it is, you know, it's so automatic, I think, to, where did I first come across it? But essentially, the idea that we all essentially in our day-to-day conversations have a tendency to kind of butt in. And as you say, holding that space and just listening to whoever that person is and what they are saying is healing for both parties ultimately. And it's something that I try quite hard at in my day-to-day now, because I think it must have been in the book, there was an exercise or something, but it really brought to the surface and shone a light on the idea that, man, when you're at the pub with your friends or at home with your family, you are just talking over one another all the time. There's no real listening being done.
Well, particularly this year, where everybody's become an armchair expert in something that they had no clue about last year, whether like in so many ways, it's like everybody's got an opinion. And there is, and I think social media doesn't help. It becomes a battle to shout the loudest about something, and you do have to shout loudly on like social media, and it just becomes a yelling match, and we don't listen a lot. And we all like, and I think sometimes we're protecting ourselves. So as a human being, when you witness pain or you witness somebody in pain, if you're a sensitive human being, you try to fix it because you are selfish. You do not want to feel the pain that the other person is going through. And this is where I'm terrible. Like, this is what I try and do. It's like, talk about it and get it out of you, because I can feel it. Like say it, and I will prod until people like actually explode. And I'm fine with that, because I'd rather it without them. But I have to respect. I have to learn to respect that people's breakdowns must come in their own timing. I can't just force them to have an emotional breakdown because it would help me. But I do feel that like we can almost selfishly try and make people share when they may not want to, and then when they do share, even if they do want to, we're not trying to solve their problem because we're being evil. We're trying to solve it because generally like 99% of people are nice people. We want to help. But I'm the classic, like I'm telling you, but I don't want you to tell me what to do about it. Like, I don't want your advice, I don't want your opinion. I'm just telling you. And there are many people like that. So it's you know, you just have to know who you're dealing with. You know.
Yeah, it's something I reflected on, I think, early this year, really, as a practitioner, being part of someone's sort of healing journey, and what part I play, I guess, was part of the reflection. And this idea that, for me, what I had to do back then was ultimately take some pressure off myself, because I think I was putting this undue pressure that I have to help, heal, fix, whatever bad term you want to use, this person, because that's why they've come to me. But ultimately, that's not the way it works anyway, as we all know. And there's nothing wrong with being the middleman within that person's journey to where they want to be. That's still a really important role that is absolutely brilliant and is an honor to play. And that kind of, it sounds so simple and so basic, but it took me 13 years of practicing to kind of to fully understand that, okay, actually that takes a lot of pressure off, which, to be fair, makes me a better practitioner as well. So that, what you said resonated with that.
And I think sometimes patients, maybe they realize, I don't know, but like I don't think they realize how much we take home as practitioners. Like I don't have a decent boundary between my work life and my, and I might not respond to your email on Sunday, but if you've emailed me on a Sunday, trust me, I've read it, even if it's really, really long, because it matters. And yes, maybe we want to fix, heal, whatever those terrible words are. But also, there's a huge amount of responsibility, I feel, that we can feel is being placed on our shoulders as professionals, as practitioners. And we want to help. Like, we wouldn't be doing our jobs if we didn't just want to help people find their route to being better, to healing, to being whatever they want to be. And I'm very much like you. It's like, so not only are people coming to me, but they're paying me money to, be the person that can be relied upon to do something that often in my practice, and I'm sure it's the case with you, often a lot of other practitioners have not been able to do. And I kind of joke with them when they say, you're my last hope, which happens more often than I'd like. And I just go, oh, no pressure then. And I'm like, no, they don't understand. Like, this is so much pressure, because I feel that every human being deserves to feel okay. Like, they do. And if I've got the tools to help that person get to that point, I try and give them all of the tools. And I then make myself feel responsible for it. And there are some patients that are just not my patient, or I'm just not the person for them. And I've battled with that so hard, not being able to, be what that person needed ultimately.
Yeah. I had such a fascinating day a couple of years ago, probably now, whereby we were exploring, I guess, kind of practitioner-client relationship, in the sense that if you imagine a graph just sort of with a Y and an X axis, whichever way round they are, and you've got a thinker at the top and a feeler at the bottom, and you've got sort of an introvert and an extrovert, basically. And there was a series of questions that you go through to understand who you are ultimately. And I was more of I was quite a combination of thinking and feeling, but I was quite a big introvert ultimately. And the really interesting part was towards the end of the day, when you start to understand how the person delivering this sort of presentation used the word kryptonite, which might not be the best term, but that is kind of often the opposite person within this kind of graph. So an introvert practitioner with an extroverted client who is a massive thinker, when the practitioner is a massive feeler, is like, oh, you're probably going to hit heads quite a lot trying to work together. And it really made a lot of sense. And it's something that we don't really get taught in school. It's not something that gets explored, but it's such a powerful part of it when we also consider what some of the research shows us around that therapeutic relationship is the most important part in the healing process. So you really want to try and match up with the right person for you, I guess.
Yeah, and it's so difficult, because people, when they're really ill, as they often are when they arrive at our doors, they're filled with fear and this agitation and this kind of nervous system stress that ends up in my inbox. It really does. Like, people panic openly in my inbox, and I have to take a deep breath a lot of times and make sure that I'm not taking that personally. But we're taught so little in our courses. We're taught how to maybe interpret some testing, and tell people what supplements to take. We're not taught about human beings. We're not taught about how illness shows up in the soul of somebody, and how much pain they're in that has nothing to do with their physical pain, and everything to do with the fact that their life's been interrupted, and all of these things. And because we are superb generalists, even if we've got a supreme niche, we are generalists because of the amount we have to know. We're not always taught or able to be a match for every human being, every patient that comes across our door. It's why, and we've spoken about this before, it's why I'm passionate about knowing the other practitioners. And it's a bigger world now, but the functional medicine scene's relatively small, and I know who to send somebody to if they've got fertility concerns, if they've got PCOS, if they've got mold issues, if they've got these are things that come in my door, and sometimes I'll take them, but most oftentimes I'll be referring them off to people we know, to our colleagues and friends and people we've come across in our world. And there are times when you can see the level of support that somebody's going to need. And, you know, me being over here in South Africa, I'm not seeing patients face to face. I can't, nobody's at the moment, but you know what I mean? I can't, you need somebody who's physically in the room with you, holding your energy. And I can't do that on Zoom. So please go to a clinic. And I think that we need to respect that we're not the keys for every human being. And, you know, making sure, I think the thing that we need to park as practitioners is ego a lot of the time, so that we can have the faith to say, go to X person, go to Y person, because they're better for you.
Yeah, definitely. I'll always remember a friend and kind of mentor of mine years ago saying that, you know, I thought it was a really good point. Ultimately, that being financially successful as a practitioner, or however you want to define that ultimately, is actually really important to be a good practitioner. Because if you've got that security and that comfort, you can refer and you can say no, and you have that level of comfort that you don't have to take on that client. And I can put my hand up, and I know lots of other practitioners have, having had these sorts of conversations whereby, especially at the beginning of your career, you're just taking on everything because you're trying to build a business and you're trying to earn money to pay your bills and things. And that's great because obviously you're building that experience and you're working with different conditions. But yeah, there's something to be said about getting to that point where you can comfortably be like, okay, I know where my strengths lie now. And I have my kind of referral network, as you say.
Yeah, and to other practitioners as well, to other disciplines. I know the art of functional medicine, I think, is knowing when it's a you thing and when it's a somebody else thing. And like, we aren't taught enough that, like, even though we know a lot, we don't know everything. Like, yes, I can recommend, you know, breathwork or something, but I'm not a breathwork practitioner. Like, you need to actually go find that person to get the real kind of expertise on it. And as we've discussed before, referring to the physical disciplines, when there is something that is really affecting your nervous system, I can give you all the antimicrobials in the world, but if I can't get your nervous system to calm down, your SIBO will keep coming back. You know, it will like be a recurrent thing. And like knowing, yeah, I wish my accountant had your headspace, because I think I say no a bit too much, because it is like I having been a patient way more than I've been a professional, the match between the two headspaces is so important. It's really important to get right. And, you know, I create a nice illusion of, I mean, some patients say to me the other day about how yeah, it was a cost thing, because supplements are stupidly expensive these days, really expensive. And I'd recommended something and not checked the price, because I don't, and it had jumped up by 20 quid or something since I'd last recommended it. So it's something stupid. And she's like, yeah, you might think you can afford that with all of your kind of like, and like, you look at this and you might think that that's exactly, I've got this kind of supremely luxurious lifestyle and stuff like that, but I know where to prioritize spending money, basically. And we just do the best we can, but it's not like, you don't go into healthcare to be a multimillionaire. I don't think, anyway, unless we know anybody who's managed that trick yet.
No.
And particularly in context and like the health path model, because this is the health path kind of podcast, like the amount that we give out for free is ridiculous. Like, we just like, and we have, like, I'm sure nobody will mind sort of opening the kimono a little bit, and like we have internal chats and saying, oh, yeah, no, just like help them out, like just do it because the customer's the one that matters. And that's not a business perspective, the customer's always right. That's from a, oh no, this is healthcare, we must prioritize the healthcare of the patient, irrespective of bottom line, of, you know, income to the company, you know, whether our practitioners are like, what we're doing. Like, the main concern always is, you know, our customer. And that is probably not a business model that would like set the world alight in terms of entrepreneurial profit share, but you know what, it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, 100%. I love listening to you, Victoria.
I am very conscious that I said shut up and listen, and I've talked quite a lot in the last hour.
Good. That's all kind of always my intention. It's like, I said to someone recently on the podcast, if I wanted to talk, I could just do my own solo show. I can do that all day, every day. So when there's a guest on, it's very much about them.
Let me just ask you a question though.
Okay.
Plans for 2021. Speak about the obvious if you would like to, but 2021, what's your future looking like?
Oh, how should I answer this? I'm just going to spill everything, and about 10% of it's actually going to happen, but this is where I'm at the moment. So as some know, I become a dad at the end of March. So that's the main thing. And I guess from that perspective, I think we said off air, I'm trying to figure out how to balance my year in regards to being around and being able to play dad to the most I can, while earning enough to pay my bills ultimately. And that's going to be, I think, a real challenge for me in 2021 ultimately. I'm hoping that by the end of 2021, I will be a breath worker, sort of a certified breath worker. Although I hold that lightly, just because there's quite a lot that has to be done. And with baby coming, we'll see. But I should be doing hopefully a seminar in February, probably one in the autumn. And then I've got to do, I think, it's something crazy, like 400 hours of case studies. So I've got to breathe quite a lot of people next year. Which they call it, yeah.
Okay.
Which I'm really looking forward to. Like I'm desperate to bring in a little bit more body work, basically. And the fact that transformational breath, as far as I know, is the main school of breath work where there is quite a lot of kind of hands-on palpation type work, which I really like. And I'm desperate to kind of get into that area of kind of supporting people and healing people, because my experience with breath work has been just insane ultimately. And the healing that has taken place on a physical level through breath work, but also accessing what I'll call the spiritual level, is so profound. So I'm referring most of my clients now to kind of breath workers, because I think so many of us can benefit from that, whether it's actually learning how to breathe moment to moment, which most of us are very poor at, or whether it's actually doing more of a holotropic breathwork session or a transformational breathwork session where you can experience these profound emotional releases and the release of trauma and that energy that is stored somewhere in the body. And that, for me, I haven't come across yet anything else like it. So I'm really excited about that. And then I guess my final thing is exploring becoming a psychedelic practitioner. So obviously that would mean working in like the Netherlands or in Portugal or somewhere where it's legal. And Synthesis, as anyone who follows me will know, recently had an online 3-day conference, and they had a webinar before that, and they are in my eyes kind of leading the way in regards to starting to train practitioners in different fields to become psychedelic practitioners, which ultimately is holding space for people having a psychedelic experience. And that is the day that I had my first psychedelic experience, I was like, this has to be my future. And I think my dream over next year, but obviously the years to come, will be to try and integrate the physical with the emotional and the spiritual and the mental. So trying to have all of these different tools in my toolkit to utilize as and when needed. But I'm viewing it as a 5-year mission and vision. I don't think it's just 2021. That would be a pretty intense year.
Particularly with baby as well, that would be like a rocking achievement.
As well, I think to be honest, if I can get to the end of 2021 sane, it will be a successful year. So yeah, that's kind of, I think, what my year is looking like. And I just want to, I guess, to try and bring it back into today's conversation a little bit as well, like what I've learned from this year that I want to take forwards. It's fluidity, I guess, kind of rolling with what comes up and not necessarily attaching too strongly to any of the things I just mentioned as well, because who knows what's going to happen? It could be that in February we're still not allowed to come and breathe in this small space amongst one another, etc. So that might not go ahead. So it's kind of just one thing that I know that I can get better at is being in the present moment and just accepting what is. I've definitely had a tendency over the 14 years, and this is a blessing and a curse, I think, just to continually push forwards no matter what, whether that's through, learning, doing courses, whether it's through physical exercise, whatever it may be. But I'm learning now just to kind of calm down, to kind of, as you were talking about, lean into my body, because a big thing for me with breath work has been, it highlights to me the amount of tension that I do hold in my body. And the beautiful thing with that seminar was it's broken down into the first 2 days are physical, the second 2 days are emotional, and the last 2 days are spiritual. So there is like a very well thought out journey that you go on over these 6 days, and you can see people just like melting away and becoming their higher self, or whatever you want to describe that as. It's a beautiful thing to witness and experience. But those first 2 days being physical, it was, I've said it before, it was a genuine slap in the face, the amount of tension that I could just feel starting to dissipate. And for me, partly, and this hopefully doesn't come across the wrong way, I think if I'm like that, I like to think I'm a relatively kind of self-aware, mindful guy. Then I'm like, what are some people probably walking around like? And then what I've experienced, and I'm sure this is universal, is as that tension dissipates, as that kind of energy that hasn't been discharged, as I think Peter Levine calls it, as that goes, it frees up energy and communication within your overall system, energetically, probably kind of circulatory and all the physical things as well. And as a result, I think that's when the emotions are able to bubble up to the surface. So you start to feel them in the second 2 days. And then you're kind of blown out the universe on the third 2 days, where you have more of a spiritual experience. And honestly, I think going back to this idea that as a society, we're so disconnected from ourselves, from nature, a lot of people, I think, from meaningful work, etc. Those sorts of experiences for me really start to bring us back to what's important, what's true, what's real, and how we have evolved to live. Because that week, there were 6 of us breathing, we had 6 facilitators, so there's 12 of us, I think, in total. And it's just, that idea of kind of almost living with each other and sharing your most sort of deep secrets and vulnerabilities is just magical, I think. So that's my kind of vision. I want to be, as you, Victoria, mentioned, holding those spaces and being involved in those spaces is the dream, really.
Wow, watch out, Will.
Yeah, I've said to Rich, obviously the kind of founder of Health Path, that I'm well and truly ready for Health Path retreats. So that will be one of the next ventures, maybe, for Health Path.
Amazing. Exclusive, everyone.
But that would be fun. We've got an amazing team. We've got an amazing community. And I think it's just kind of a natural thing to consider, bringing some of these people together, bringing us face to face with some of our community, because obviously we are an online remote sort of company. So it'd be pretty special, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Very good.
Excellent. Victoria, is there anything that you would like to kind of finish with today?
No, I think that it's so fascinating to hear how the healthcare community is evolving. Like, we're not the only ones moving in the bring everything together, body, mind, soul element. And my pledge for 2021 is to start speaking more about the stuff that we were talking about earlier, the spiritual meaning of illness, all those kinds of things. And I think the more that we can bring, for want of many better words, the holistic perspective and good people doing good work, I think that, no matter what we've been through in 2020, there's huge amounts of positivity that we can take going forward. So fingers crossed that 2021 is a different experience.
Yeah, It will be in some shape or form. That's the good news.
Yeah. Cool.
Brilliant. Victoria, thank you so much for coming back on. It's always an absolute delight.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to speak to you, and we do it mostly recorded, so everyone hears our private conversations. So
brilliant. Well, until next time.
Absolutely, very, very, very lovely to speak to you, and I'm assuming this is going out soon, so Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to everyone.
Yeah, Merry Christmas, everyone.